It is funny how certain pieces of financial advice feel less like actual advice and more like the laws of physics. Like if you drop an apple, it falls to the ground.
Right, yeah. Or you always save for retirement.
Exactly. And whatever you do, you absolutely wait until you are 70 to claim your Social Security.
It really is treated as this universal truth. I mean, it's the golden rule of retirement planning, especially for our listeners who are transitioning from military service into their second careers and full retirement. We cling to it because, well, it is simple.
Yeah, human beings love a simple, rigid rule, right? Especially when dealing with something as terrifying as, funding the last 30 years of your life.
Oh, absolutely. But when you actually look under the hood of that advice, you realize that gravity might not be working the way you thought it was.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Veteran Briefing. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a financial strategy that turns conventional wisdom completely upside down. We're going to explore exactly why delaying your Social Security claim until age 70 is, for a lot of people, the absolutely wrong move.
Which is going to sound incredibly counterintuitive if you have been reading standard financial blogs for the last decade.
Right. And to do this, we are looking at a really detailed breakdown by retirement expert Eric Bottleson. Our mission today is to unpack his insights, look at the actual timeline of retirement, and expose the hidden traps that are, actively harming people's financial futures.
And their quality of life, really, while they just stubbornly wait for that age 70 milestone.
So if you are listening to this right now, it is vital to understand why this matters to your specific situation.
Yeah, because financial advice is so often given in a vacuum. You have to remember that a strategy considered safe for a financial advisor to hand out as blanket advice, it isn't necessarily mathematically or behaviorally sound for your complex life.
Right. Advisors like the safety of the conventional rule.
Exactly. But that safety might be quietly costing you a fortune.
So let's start with the loudest argument for waiting, which is always the math. The pitch you hear constantly is, if you delay past your full retirement age, your benefit grows by a guaranteed 8%. Every single year.
Which sounds incredible on the surface. I mean, where else are you getting a guaranteed 8% return in today's market?
Nowhere, right. But Eric points out that this framing is fundamentally flawed.
It is. What's fascinating here is everything that pitch completely leaves out. Delaying Social Security is never a decision you make in a vacuum.
Yeah, you still have to live.
Right. While you are sitting around waiting for that 8% growth on your future government check between the ages of, say, 62 and 70, you still have to buy groceries, you still have to pay your property taxes, cover your utility bills. The world just doesn't pause for 8 years.
So the money to live has to come from somewhere, which means you are pulling it out of your own investment portfolios, like your IRAs or your TSP. And here is where I think the concept of opportunity cost comes in, which finance folks call the discount rate.
Yes, the discount rate is huge here.
Like if I take $10,000 out of my investment accounts today to pay for my life because I don't have a Social Security check coming in, I'm not just losing that $10,000.
Right. You are losing all the compounding interest.
Exactly. All the growth that specific money would have generated over the next 10 or 20 years if I had just left it alone.
That is the perfect way to explain it. You are basically trading the growth of your own portfolio for the growth of your future Social Security check. And when you factor your personal discount rate into the equation, it changes the entire calculation of when you actually break even.
Let's put some hard numbers on this from the research, because the break-even ages just totally blew my mind.
Oh, they are staggering. So if we assume a very conservative 3.5% discount rate, meaning your portfolio is only expected to grow by 3.5% a year, the break-even point between claiming at 62 versus waiting until 70 is around age 85.
Okay, so if you are listening, you might be thinking, well, age 85, I have good genetics, I eat my vegetables, I plan to live past 85.
And that is a fair assumption. But what if your portfolio grows a bit faster than a highly conservative 3.5%?
Right.
If you have a 6% discount rate, that break-even age pushes all the way past age 97.
Wait, 97?
Yes. You would have to live to be 98 just to make waiting mathematically worth the money you sacrifice from your own accounts.
That is wild. The goalposts just move entirely out of reach.
They do, and the Social Security Administration's own internal research actually backs this up. Their data shows that if your investment portfolio is expected to grow by more than 5.8% a year, waiting until 70 is mathematically the wrong choice. Yeah. And to put that 5.8% into perspective, a very conservative, balanced 50-50 portfolio historically returns around 4.6%. But an all-stock portfolio historically comes in around 6.7%.
So if you are heavily invested in the market, your break-even point is getting pushed well past the age most people can reasonably plan for.
Exactly. Which brings us to the ultimate reality check on mortality.
Yeah.
That math assumes you are going to live to 95 or 97, but what are the actual odds of that happening?
Right.
According to the Social Security Administration's own actuarial tables, only 6% of 62-year-old men actually live to be 95.
Wow.
For women, it is slightly higher at 12%.
Wait, I need to pause here. 6% of men and 12% of women. That is roughly like a 1 in 6 chance of happening at absolute best.
Yeah, the odds are heavily stacked against the delay strategy when you look at actual human lifespans.
It is like you are sitting at a casino table, and the dealer is asking you to fold a winning hand right now, a hand that guarantees you cash today, for a 1 in 6 chance at a slightly bigger payout 3 decades from now.
Right.
And oh, by the way, while you are waiting for those 3 decades to pass, you have to slowly drain your current stack of chips just to keep your seat at the table. It is just a fundamentally flawed bet.
You are risking real dollars today for statistical improbability tomorrow. That is the trap of the math illusion.
If you're finding these discussions helpful, please subscribe to Veteran Briefing so you never miss important updates and practical information for veterans and their families.
It really is so important to stay informed on this stuff.
Absolutely. But let's step away from the spreadsheets for a minute, because you and I both know that human beings do not make decisions purely on math. We are emotional creatures. I know what you might be thinking if you've been a diligent saver your whole military career. We are taught to be frugal. So, isn't it just responsible to hold back early on? Like, if you take Social Security at 62 and spend your money early, aren't you risking running out when you are 85 and facing massive healthcare bills?
It is a very natural fear, but we have to look at how retirees actually behave and experience life, not just how we assume they should. There is this fascinating research from David Blanchett at Morningstar that introduces the concept of the retirement spending smile.
The spending smile. I love that visualization.
It makes so much sense when you see it. If you track retiree spending on a graph over time, it naturally forms the shape of a smile. People spend the most in their early healthy years of retirement.
Well, that makes sense.
This is your early 60s when you were finally taking those big trips, picking up new hobbies, maybe helping out your adult children. You were doing all the energetic things that took a back seat while you were serving or working.
Yeah, exactly.
Then, as you age into your late 70s and 80s, your energy drops, and your spending naturally dips down in those middle years.
So that's the bottom of the smile.
Right. And then finally, the curve spikes back up at the very end of life, primarily due to assisted living or healthcare costs.
So your highest discretionary spending years and your healthiest, most vibrant years overlap perfectly.
They do. But here's the behavioral gap that derails so many carefully laid plans. The research shows that retirees will comfortably and freely spend 80% of fixed guaranteed income, like a military pension or a Social Security check.
Okay.
But they will only spend about 50% of the income their investment portfolio could actually sustainably support.
Because after 30 or 40 years of religiously saving and watching that account balance grow, they view their investment portfolio as a scorecard.
That is exactly the psychology. They are terrified of withdrawals. Every time the balance goes down, it triggers this deep sense of failure or panic.
Even if their financial advisor is showing them a plan that proves they have plenty of money to last a century.
Exactly. So they hoard it. They just sit on the cash.
Mm-hmm.
Eric shares a heartbreaking story in his breakdown about a client, we'll call her Janet, that perfectly illustrates this.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about Janet.
So Janet had just turned 70, and she was finally turning on her Social Security. But when she sat down with him, she talked about the previous 7 years. She had spent her 60s watching her portfolio balance slowly drop while she waited to claim.
Right, draining the chips.
And because she was gripped by that fear of the shrinking scorecard, she severely held back on her lifestyle. She didn't take the trips. She didn't buy the things she wanted. She lived entirely in a state of artificial scarcity.
Because she was waiting for that safe, guaranteed government check at 70 so she could finally give herself, like, psychological permission to spend money?
Yes. But when the check finally arrived at 70, her knees were bad. The vibrant energy she had at 63 was simply gone. She literally looked at her advisor and said that the money arrived right as the window to actually enjoy it was closing.
Oh, man. Which is just a tragic outcome for someone who did everything right during their working years.
It really is.
It makes me think of someone who buys a rare, incredibly expensive bottle of wine to celebrate their retirement. But they keep saying, let's wait for more special occasion.
Oh, I know people who do exactly that.
Right. They wait, and by the time they finally pop the cork 10 years later, the wine has oxidized and turned to vinegar. Like, the asset is still there, but the utility of it, the actual joy it was supposed to provide, has completely expired.
That is exactly it. For the healthy retiree, delaying until 70 often means trying to fund the most active years of your life from a portfolio you are psychologically terrified to touch. You end up restricting your own joy because you don't have the psychological safety net of that monthly Social Security check coming in.
So if we agree you shouldn't hoard your money, and you should actually spend your portfolio to enjoy your 60s, the immediate panic for anyone listening is going to be the market, right?
Oh, of course.
They'll say, what if the stock market crashes while I'm paying for my grandchild's college or taking that vacation?
And that introduces a critical mechanical danger for the person who stubbornly waits until 70 while spending heavily from their investments. It is a concept called sequence of returns risk. This might be the most expensive oversight we discuss today.
Let me make sure I'm explaining this right for the listener.
Okay.
Sequence of returns risk is essentially the danger of the market crashing the exact year you decide to retire.
Right.
Because if you're waiting until 70 to claim Social Security, you are relying entirely on pulling cash out of your investments to live. So if the market takes a dive, you are suddenly forced to pull money out while the account is already bleeding value.
That is the exact mechanism. And to understand why it is so dangerous, you have to understand the unforgiving math of market losses. Like, if your portfolio loses 10%, you don't just need a 10% gain the next year to get back to where you started.
You need an 11% gain.
Exactly. A 30% loss requires a 33% gain to break even. A 50% loss requires a 100% gain just to get back to zero.
Wow. And that is the math before you factor in the thousands of dollars you're pulling out every single month to buy groceries and pay your mortgage.
The hole gets exponentially deeper. Let's put some concrete numbers to this from Eric's source material because the contrast is brutal. Take a 61-year-old who retires with $1.375 million in the bank.
Okay, nice nest egg.
Right. And they need $63,000 a year to live comfortably. If they decide to wait until 70 for Social Security, they have to pull that entire $63,000 from their investments. As they draw down the balance over the decade, their withdrawal rate climbs higher and higher, eventually hitting a terrifying 7.2% by age 69.
Which any financial planner will tell you is way too high of a withdrawal rate to sustain over the long haul.
Oh, absolutely. Now look at the alternative. If they just claimed Social Security at 62, that guaranteed government money starts flowing in immediately. They don't have to pull nearly as much from their portfolio to hit that $63,000 lifestyle goal. In that scenario, their withdrawal rate never exceeds 4.5%.
So the person waiting is draining the tank at 7.2%, while the person who claimed early is sipping at 4.5%.
Right.
So what actually happens when the market hits a recession early in their retirement?
The consequence is massive. If there are just 2 bad market years early in retirement, the person who insisted on waiting until 70 and therefore had to drain their accounts at that much higher rate ends up with a portfolio balance that is nearly $176,000 lower than the person who claimed early.
$176,000, just from a timing mismatch.
And that gap follows them forever. It permanently damages the compounding power of the portfolio for the rest of their life.
It is like chopping firewood from your own house during a winter storm.
Yeah.
You're cold, so you start ripping the floorboards up to throw in the fireplace.
That is a painful image, but yeah, it's accurate.
You are forced to sell off your investment shares at rock-bottom market prices just to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And the tragedy is, when the spring market rally finally arrives a year later, you can't benefit from the recovery because those shares are permanently gone. They've already been burned.
Claiming Social Security early acts as a buffer. It provides a baseline of cash so you don't have to chop up your house for firewood during a bad market. It protects your shares so they can be there for the recovery.
We have covered so much ground on the early years of retirement. We've talked about the math illusion, the behavioral reality of the spending smile,
Yeah.
and the mechanical dangers of a market crash. But let's look at the horizon.
Okay.
Let's shift the perspective from protecting your immediate lifestyle in your 60s to looking at what happens at the end of life. What happens to the wealth you plan to leave behind for your kids or your favorite charities?
This is where optimizing for the biggest possible monthly Social Security check often quietly transfers massive amounts of wealth away from your heirs. Conventional advice focuses obsessively on your monthly income, but it completely ignores the architecture of your estate.
Let's break down why that happens.
Well, it comes down to the fundamental difference between what passes on when you die and what doesn't. Your investment portfolio, your stocks, bonds, IRAs can compound for decades and be passed down directly to your children.
Right.
Social Security does not pass on in that way. Once you and your spouse pass away, those government payments just evaporate.
So how does the act of waiting until 70 specifically hurt the estate you leave behind?
Let's use some straightforward math. Say you need $70,000 a year from your investments to bridge the gap while you wait to claim Social Security. If you wait 7 years, pulling $70,000 a year, you have removed nearly $500,000 of principal from your estate.
$500,000 just gone.
Gone from the estate. And that is just the principal. Think about the opportunity costs we discussed earlier. It doesn't factor in the decades of compounding growth that $500,000 would have earned if you had left it invested and lived off your Social Security check instead.
Right, because it would have kept growing.
Exactly. If that $500,000 had stayed in the market at a modest 7% return, it would double in 10 years. By optimizing for a slightly larger check from the government for yourself, you might be bleeding millions of dollars from your heirs in the long run.
Which is absolutely heartbreaking if leaving a generational legacy was, one of your primary life goals.
Yeah.
But there is one final pillar holding up the wait till 70 rule that we have to tackle. It is the reason financial advisors bring up constantly, especially for good savers: taxes.
Ah, yes, the specter of the IRS.
Let me set the table on this one because the advice sounds incredibly smart on the surface. When you put money into a traditional IRA, you don't pay taxes on it, but the government won't let you avoid taxes forever. Eventually, they force you to start taking money out. These are called required minimum distributions, or RMDs.
Right.
And when you take that money out, it gets taxed as regular income. So advisors will often say, wait until 70 to claim Social Security. Use the low-income years in your 60s to do Roth conversions, which basically means you voluntarily move your money from pre-tax accounts to tax-free accounts while you are in a low tax bracket to avoid a massive tax bomb when RMDs hit in your 70s.
It is a phenomenal theoretical tax hack, and it is the primary reason the delay strategy is pushed so aggressively on high earners.
So why is it bad advice for the average listener?
Because it is a strategy designed for a very specific ultra-high net worth problem, and it's being misapplied to everyday savers. The math on that massive tax bomb only materializes if you have a massive pre-tax IRA. We are talking $2 million or more in pre-tax accounts.
Okay, so if I have a healthy retirement account, say $700,000 or $800,000, what happens?
If you have an $800,000 IRA, your required minimum distribution in your 70s is going to be around $30,000 a year. That amount is not going to rocket you into some punitive, catastrophic tax bracket. The tax bomb just doesn't exist for you.
Wow, okay.
But if you blindly follow the advice to delay Social Security and aggressively drain your accounts just to orchestrate these Roth conversions in your 60s, you are causing immense collateral damage to your life.
You are basically taking a heavy chemotherapy for a cancer you don't even have.
Precisely. You are sacrificing almost a decade of real income, a decade of spending power, and a decade of actual life enjoyment for a phantom tax benefit that was never going to make a meaningful difference to your specific tax bracket anyway.
That is wild. The question you have to ask is not, should I delay to optimize my taxes? The real question you need to ask your advisor is, do I actually have an RMD problem large enough to justify ruining my 60s?
Yes. You have to demand they show you the actual math for your specific bracket.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. We have completely dismantled the golden rule today. So what is the core synthesis here? What does the listener need to walk away with?
The core theme is that claiming Social Security is not just a math equation on a sterile spreadsheet. It is a highly personalized timing, lifestyle, and risk management decision. blanket advice like always wait until 70. It completely ignores the reality of your specific portfolio returns, the realities of human mortality, your psychological need for spending permission, and your legacy goals.
So if you are listening right now, here is your practical action for today. Before you accept generic advice to delay, you need to sit down and ask some hard questions. Ask your advisor what return they are assuming on your portfolio, ask them what your specific discount rate is, and demand they show you the math on whether you actually have a required minimum distribution problem worth solving. Do not let someone apply a universal law of gravity to your unique life.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder, something that builds on everything we have discussed about behavior and fear. We spend our entire adult lives treating our investment portfolios like a high score in an arcade video game, a score that we are absolutely terrified to lower. We attach our self-worth to that number going up.
Yeah, we really do.
But if the wait till 70 rule is actually just a myth, driven largely by our own psychological fear of spending the money we worked so hard to save, well, what other deeply ingrained financial rules are you blindly following? What other invisible, self-imposed barriers are secretly preventing you from enjoying the life you spent decades working for?
That is a deeply provocative question. It really makes you realize that sometimes conventional wisdom is just conventional fear masquerading as good advice. It might be time to stop treating your retirement like a rigid math test you are terrified of failing, and start opening that rare bottle of wine before it turns to vinegar. Thank you for watching Veteran Briefing. Take care, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next episode.